The movie began with Kiri seemingly in an interview sharing her experience from her hometown, Koruzu. She remarked that these sensations were difficult to fathom. It then transitioned to a scene where a man was lying on the floor, covered by blood, in the middle of a spiraling staircase. All were perplexed, alarmed, and afraid as they gazed at the man. What happened to him? How did he die? And why? It all started with Kiri staring by the road, overlooking her hometown, Koruzu. She was fascinated by the scenery that she almost lost track of time. Suddenly, a strong gush of wind blew from behind her. What had happened took her by surprise. She had a slight apprehension, but brushed it off and left. A sense of inking persisted, though. Was this a bad omen, or just entirely coincidental? Let's find out. Hurriedly, she descended towards the town to get to her destination. It was clear as she ran around the area that her path was constantly changing and curving, almost like spinning. Before the mayhem began, the town usually had a plain aesthetic. 6 Jizo dolls wearing crimson bibs were also on exhibit to symbolize the practice of thwarting evil. Slowly making her way to their rendezvous, she came across a classmate named Yamaguchi. To grab her attention, he repeatedly tried to scare her. Kiri thought he was strange and laughed at his foolishness. She tried escaping Yamaguchi, but he stopped this and asked her to be his love interest. But Kiri dismissed his antics and proceeded to their meeting place. As she escaped Yamaguchi, she came across a man, Mr. Sedu. She decided to approach and greet the man but was taken aback. The man was engrossed in filming a snail attached to the wall. Zooming in on the snail, he was transfixed on its shell. Kiri was bothered and chose to ignore the man. Moments later, by the entrance of a tunnel, she awaits the arrival of her friend Shuichi Sedu. The two were childhood friends, and Kiri had a secret crush on the boy. Together, they rode Shuichi's bike home. They were yelled at by a policeman as they rode through the town. By this point, spiral-shaped objects were seemingly evident. The atmosphere transformed into one of romance as Kiri hugged Shuichi fiercely. Kiri's eyes betrayed his love and admiration for the young man. Smiling, this is the bloom of one's young love. It's hard to tell what Shuichi was thinking at that moment. Hopefully, something that involves Kiri in it. They passed by a barber shop along the way, bidding their greeting to the shop owner. A worker of that said shop was taken aback. One of the signage, possibly one with the spiral design, was missing. The two, Shuichi and Kiri, stayed by a small park, and Kiri conveyed her experience of the day. She discussed her struggles in her studies, comparing herself with Shuichi. She later revealed her run-in with Shuichi's father, whom she believed was acting out of order. Shuichi agreed, saying his father had been acting strange these past few days. Kiri questioned why Shuichi had also behaved strangely, but she ignored her thoughts, saying Shuichi was just pressured due to college entrance exams. Shuichi later asked if Kiri was interested in running away with him. This took Kiri by surprise and sparked some interest in her. Unfortunately, before she could respond, Shuichi dismissed this and offered to return home. On the way home, Kiri bought fresh fruits from a merchant. The merchant even offered a melon in celebration of the award Kiri's father had received. Kiri thanked the lovely shopkeeper and left happily for home. At home, she discovered that Mr. Sedu was also present at the workshop of her father, Mr. Gosama. This time, he was filming the process of creating pots, where he was fascinated by the twirling motion of the pottery. To him, pottery is not an art but rather the art of vortex. Mr. Sedu asked if the man could create pottery designs with spiral layouts. He continued to emphasize the beauty of spirals, claiming that twirling was a perfected form of beauty. Although Mr. Gosama was initially puzzled, he took his suggestion and considered ways to incorporate spirals into his designs. Kiri initially considered it amusing that the two were focused on the subject. Mr. Sedu's demeanor abruptly shifted as he muttered something about how puzzling the spirals were. He approached the spinning pot and started shooting it as it spun. He was pointing the film camera towards the whirling pot and gushing about how fantastic it was. He then proceeded to point the camera on Mr. Gosama, saying he was a master of such fine art, which was concerning. At dinner, Kiri presented the melon for dessert. She enjoyed the dessert with her father while they chatted about their day. She also complimented her father on receiving the prize. In response, he thanked her for giving him the lucky charm earlier. He thought that the object was the source of all luck. That night, tired after studying, she went through her stuff and found a photo album containing her memories with Shuichi. It had pictures of them when they were younger, playing by the slides as they enjoy some ice cream. When Kiri tripped, causing her to cry, Shuichi was there to comfort her, and this memory made Kiri smile. She realized Shuichi has been her guardian angel since. She later remembered the day when her mother died. Shuichi was there as well, and to stop her from crying, Shuichi volunteered to be her mother instead. Kiri disagreed, stating that she doesn't want a boy to be her mother. Kiri was enjoying her nostalgic thoughts while recalling these moments. She then remembered what Shuichi said about running away together. This made her giggle and waited for that day to come. The following day at school, Kiri ran into a classmate, with whom she discussed the development of her friendship with Shuichi. Her friend joked, saying Kiri is such a scaredy cat, not being about to tell Shuichi how she truly feels. Then, out of nowhere, Kiri's stalker came and surprised the two. Kiri's friend informed Yamaguchi that his antics to win Kiri over were pointless. She continued by saying that it was useless because Kiri already had a boyfriend. But Yamaguchi didn't mind at all. His only goal for reaching out to Kiri was to gain popularity after she became his. The two girls had given up on Yamaguchi and fled. Later on, as they were talking about things, slowly ascending a spiral staircase, a man fell from the top. Blood covered the pavement as he plummeted to his death. It was the man who appeared in the film's opening scene. Horrified and feeling queasy, Kiri together with her friend went to the restroom. She later met up with the school's IT girls, headed by Sakino. Sakino was this girl who thrived on attention. She continued by praising the man for being the center of attention. But if the man hadn't been dead, he wouldn't have had a chance. When Shuichi and Kiri reconnected after school, they spoke about the incident that day. Shuichi guessed the cause of the problem was the vortex, attracting anything and anyone to the very center of its core. Shuichi expressed his unease with the town, saying a curse was among them and will soon consume the whole town. Shuichi asked if his father had visited Kiri's place. Confirming this, Shuichi identified the cause of the sudden visit as the vortex. He explained the weird doings of his father. He hasn't gone to work, and his obsession with spiral things increased. One time, while he and his mother discussed his father's condition, Mr. Sedu arrived home with yet another of her collection. He even went mental during supper after devouring all of the narumen rolls. This infuriated him and proceeded in mixing his miso soup to recreate the swirling of the liquid. Kiri found this funny, seeing Mr. Sedu's actions were rather hilarious. Shuichi, however, found these somewhat unsettling. To prove his case, together they went to Shuichi's house to confirm the incident. Once more, his father had a fit when he realized all of his belongings were missing. The most disturbing part, to comfort the loss of his items, he spun his eyeball, mimicking the spinning of a vortex. This shocked Kiri, causing her to faint. Back at school, Kiri was still reflecting on the incident from earlier. She was very concerned and wary of Shuichi's father, Mr. Sedu. In class, a classmate of theirs had arrived late. He was covered in a seemingly white substance, presumably rain. The students laughed at the boy, who also criticized him, dismissing their antics. The teacher asked the boy to enter the room, slowly making his way in. The students avoided him like the plague. A bully tripped the boy, causing some of the sludge to land on his face. The bully became enraged by this and started kicking the helpless boy. A protruding shell-like bump can be seen on the boy's back, whom nobody took note of. The following scene displayed Shuichi and his mother visiting the doctor for the diagnosis of Mr. Sedu. Based on their looks, the news from the doctor was not favorable for them. After school, Kiri arrived home to find her stalker Yamaguchi waiting for her once more. He handed her a package and asked her to take a look inside. It was a jack-in-a-box, which scared and angered Kiri. She expressed her dislike for the man and left him there. But Yamaguchi was determined. He didn't lose hope. He knows soon Kiri will be his. Speeding to the tunnel, where Kiri awaits Shuichi, Kiri was disappointed for the boy didn't come today. Bothered and concerned, Kiri went home defeated. At home, she met with her father who requested that she deliver the dish Mr. Sedu had ordered. Reluctant, she went to Sedu's household. When she arrived, it seemed that no one was home. However, she could hear soft thumping coming from within the house. She followed the noise out of curiosity, hoping it might take her to a member of the family. But what she discovered would scare her for life. A piercing scream broke the silence of that night. It took the attention of the now arriving Shuichi and his mother. They investigated Kiri's screaming and discovered her in the home's laundry room. With her eyes on the washing machine in front of her, Kiri was trembling, consciously walking toward the appliance. Shuichi inspected it to confirm his assumption, and there, inside the working washing machine, their fears were confirmed. The sight caused Mrs. Sedu to vomit, disbelieving what had happened. Troubled on how things had escalated this far, they mourned the death of Mr. Sedu. They immediately proceeded to the cremation of Mr. Sedu's body. People were talking of the suicide and bad-mouthing the Sedu family. However, amidst the negative chatters of the people, a bad premonition appeared in the skies. The video clip dramatically changed the mood by focusing on the horror on Mrs. Sedu's face. Mr. Sedu's charred body has been spewing smoke into the sky. Everyone was terrified by it, and Mrs. Sedu had trauma as a result. She then experienced unexpected fainting and was taken right away to the hospital. On their way to the hospital, the smoke spiraled, seemingly in pursuit. Kiri saw it slowly descend into the middle of the dragonfly pond. Like a snake, a man approached them in the hospital after making sure Mrs. Sedu was okay. It was Mr. Tamura, Shuichi's father's co-worker. He informed them of what Mr. Sedu had done over the past weeks before he died. He claimed that his interest in the spiral artifacts began when he asked about the town's history. They then went home to identify the cause of Mr. Sedu's suicide. Viewing the film camera, they examined Mr. Sedu's recent activities. They watched the last video taken before his death. It showed how he placed a mirror inside the washing machine before he entered it. In Shuichi's understanding, his father was trying to create a portal into another dimension. Puzzled, Mr. Tamura offered to look into the origin of all the strange events that have occurred in the community in more detail. Mr. Tamura offered to take Kiri home. On their way, they talked about the relationship between Kiri and Shuichi. In the middle of their conversation, they were startled by the appearance of a muddy man crossing the road. It was Kiri's father who had taken mud from the dragon pond. This was a concern for both Kiri and Mr. Tamura, but they didn't mind it. In the hospital, Shuichi arrived to check on his mother. He was relieved to find that she was sleeping well. But when he tried to talk his mother neatly, he was shocked to see there was blood on the bed. It turns out, traumatized, his mother dug out her fingertips. In the comfort of her own home, Kiri experienced a nightmare related to the suicide incident. In her sleep, a vivid description of the incident woke her. Bothered and restless, she heard noise from her father's workshop. When she arrived there, she found out that her father was in the process of cooking the pots he made. Concerned, she asked her father to rest for the day, but he angrily dismissed Kiri, which shocked her. Against her will, she left her father as he ordered, but it was clear he was possessed. The next day at school, the students were in the gym for PE class. Kiri and her friend were talking about the Sedu family, both concerned and worried. What got their attention was Sakino. Apart from a flawless routine, Sakino's hairstyle was what everyone noticed. It was curled to perfection, bouncing gracefully as she moved like a spring. The bully from before was also acting strange. He was earnestly drinking water, with a slight bulge forming on his back. As he had promised, Mr. Temura started looking into the causes of all of these. He studied the film Mr. Sedu took, read some articles about the town, and did some research related to the current abnormalities in the town. He then slowly formulated a theory, a solid proof that may explain the phenomenon they were all experiencing. Back in the hospital, Kiri bought sweets for Shuichi's mother. Shuichi, however, threw away a cake under the pretext of his mother's trauma. All spiral objects were banned from the hospital for her mother could go crazy over them. To cover the swirls in their hair and fingertips, they were compelled to wear gloves and caps. As they entered Mrs. Sedu's room, Kiri was shocked to see the once youthful Mrs. Sedu be in very bad shape. She had bandages covering her fingers and head and was pale as a sheet. Suddenly, Shuichi excused himself because of an announcement. It turns out it was Mr. Tamaru looking for him. He appeared to have discovered the issue at hand and wanted to meet Shuichi at the Dragon Pond. As he was about to depart, Shuichi went to a corner and tore a poster apart. It was a picture depicting the interior, swirl-like structure of the ear. On their way to the Dragon Pond, he and Kiri were talking about what Mr. Temura had discovered. They came across Yamaguchi, who was livid to see the two together. He accused Kiri, asking if the man was the reason why they couldn't be together. Bold and driven by anger, Yamaguchi was determined to get Kiri's approval. What he did was utterly unspeakable. He allowed himself to be hit by Mr. Temura's passing car, which caused a major accident. Yamaguchi's body was twisted and impaled on the wheels of the car. Meanwhile, Mr. Temura also died with his face planted on the car's windshield, an eye protruding from the glass. It was a horrific sight and a horrible way to die. That evening, Kiri and Shuichi went to the Dragon Pond as planned. They can only vaguely recall their earlier experiences, both happy and unhappy, in the town together. Troubled, they comforted themselves, saying to be together throughout all this madness. In the hospital, an enormous centipede slowly made its way to Mrs. Sedu. As it tried to enter her ears, she walked up and was frightened. Determined in killing the insect, she threw a vase near her, shattering it into pieces. Moments later, she heard the voice of her deceased husband, mocking and taunting her. He repeatedly whispered that she can never get rid of herself from the vortex, saying it was everywhere. She had enough of his taunting, wanting everything to stop. And there, she took a shattered piece of the vase and plunged it into her ears. A piercing scream broke out. Another funeral was held, leaving Shuichi all alone. As what happened at Mr. Sedu's funeral, the smoke from the cremated body twirled in the air. This time, the faces of Mr. and Mrs. Sedu could be seen in the skies. What was disturbing was the image of Mrs. Sedu being eaten whole by her husband. In a room, a teacher was busy correcting the exams, when suddenly he acted out of character. He had finished numerous bottles of water, sweating excessively, and had a bump on his back. Currently on the news was an impending typhoon on its way to Japan. It was expected to land at Koruzo town. The teacher then changed the news channel, and there the story of their town was being broadcast. Two snails the size of humans were depicted climbing the school structure. Students later confirmed that the two were their classmates, and no one knows the cause of their sudden transformation. Sakino, the it girl, was also featured in the interview. Her bouncy hair has now mutated and grew, floating above her head. Students also followed her, like mindless minions, admiring her every move. Saying the news, Shuichi and Kiri were deeply concerned. They now believed the best course of action would be to flee from the town's curse. They agreed to this but went to Kiri's house to fetch her father. At the same time, the news team was about to leave the town. But as they passed through the tunnel, which was the sole route to Koruzo, the driver stated that it seems the tunnel had no exit. By this time, everything was far too late. Home, Kiri immediately looked for her father. She ran towards their workshop where she discovered it was filled with potteries, all with spiral designs on them, and a missing father. She searched for him desperately, but all she found was the lucky charm she had given him. Shuichi was knelt by the workshop entrance when she noticed him. As she was about to go near him, he warned her to stay away and leave the place at once. Kiri then noticed how Shuichi's legs were twisted to one another, and it was slowly reaching his upper torso. She cried, hugging the man, not believing what was happening. Shuichi encouraged her to leave, to be about to escape the curse before he died. Crying, she never let go of Shuichi. Suddenly, the dead body of Shuichi moved on its own and attempted to assault her. Frightened, she fled, leaving the man behind. By this point, the worst had come to the town. All the crew of the news team had met a terrible death. Sakino was also skin and bones as her hair sucked the life out of her. However, her hair grew lavishly beautiful. Shuichi was also strangled to death, with all his limbs painfully twisted. The police officer was also killed by drilling himself in the eyes. Kiri's father also met his end, presumably drowning himself in the Dragon Pond. And that was the end of Koruzo and the Curse of the Vortex.